So now, without further ado, tonight I am very excited to welcome Shastri Akella, celebrating his book, The Sea Elephant. Akella's writing has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, Fairy Tale Review, Guernica Lit Hub, The Masters Review, Electric Literature, and Craft, among others. The Sea Elephants is his debut, and he is a professor of creative writing at Michigan State University. Akella will be in conversation with Jeffrey Dale Lofton, who is a senior advisor at the Library of Congress. Red Clay Susie is his first novel, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction 2023 First Novel Prize and was awarded the Seven Hills Literary Prize for Fiction. Please enjoy the event.
Well, hello there. Thanks for coming out. We're really excited to be here. Thank you, Politics and Prose, for having us to celebrate the launch of Shastri Akella's debut novel, The Sea Elephants, in paperback. So I want to mention again in the introduction, but just congratulations on having a short story, the Magic Bangle, in the Best American Short Stories 2024, which is edited by Lauren Groff. That's quite an accomplishment. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So so excited to be here with you. One of the things that I love about books are the covers and the titles, and I'm always interested in them. And you have a couple of titles, a couple of covers actually for, I think, the India release. But your American book cover is my favorite. It's the blue, white, and red and gold mask. And so I wish you would talk about that and the title, The Sea Elephants. You know, how do the sea elephants show up on the cover and in the story itself?
Actually, both the cover and the title are to do with myth, Hindu mythology, because the main character performs Hindu myth. My agent and I struggled with the title for a long time, and I didn't know what to call it, as it was Carolyn, my editor, who actually came up with the title, which was perfect because that's the central myth that sort of runs through the whole story. In the opening chapter, you see the main character, Shagun, reads something from this book about the sea elephants. And as his story progresses, different episodes from the life of the sea elephants start to surface in the story. And towards the end, there is a performance of another sea elephant myth. So it was this one consistent thread throughout. And in many ways, the episodes that the main character chooses to perform show his own growth arc. So it just made sense. In some way, the sea elephant is his superhero avatar, if you will. And the cover, the mask is one of the characters he performs, which is a trans character from Hindu mythology. And it was designed by Dave Littman, who read the book and just felt like that was a really important character because that's the moment where the main character has a complex relationship with his own gender identity. And the day he performs his character, he sort of makes peace with his own fluidity. So it made sense to have that on the cover. But of course, readers just see this very striking pair of eyes looking at them. And but when they read the episode, they know what it connects to. So I think it's this, I love the way both his central transformative myth is there on the title, on the cover, but at the same time, the image brings in another myth. So they both sort of are, it's two pieces of myth on the cover, which I got really lucky with.
It is beautiful, and it really does fit the story so well. Now, you mentioned the street theater, and so Shagun, he navigates so many change. He finds himself in such adversity, and he navigates so many changes in this journey. The different worlds that he has. There's home, there's Magpies, the boarding school, the street theater culture, being locked away, and also there's even a small world of the cauldron, into which he escapes. And this is his decision to escape into that. He's not, locked away. But all of these are unfamiliar to me, and I think they are to most people in North America. Would you talk about how you created these different places, these different worlds, in a way that captivates someone like me who doesn't share that experience?
I think the first thing I thought of when I was writing these scenes, which I knew a lot of readers would not be familiar with these spaces. For each moment, I try to understand what is the emotional heartbeat of that moment, because I think some of those emotions, if you make an emotional anchor that any reader can sort of hold on to, then that becomes their entry point. But that is the starting point. It's not everything. The specificity of the book or the specificity of the scene allows that emotional moment to come alive in a way that's particular to 1990s India, to Shagun's experience in 90s India. So I wanted kind of to have a balance of both an emotion which readers from anywhere in the world can understand. There are moments of isolation, like when he's in the cauldron, when he finally finds his street theater troupe, he finds community, and the power and the restorative power of friendship is also something readers anywhere can connect with. And then they manifest in spaces that are very particular to the story. So without losing anything that makes him different or uniquely his own person in that moment in time that he's moving through, I was still able to bring out the emotion. At least that was my intent. So that was how I sort of found a balance between both those elements.
So you mentioned community, especially in the street theater troupe. He finds community in the cauldron too. He has a visitor. So can you tell us a little bit of that without giving anything away about what goes on there?
It's so the cauldron. Shagun's at a boarding school, and he just does not have any friends there because he's queer. He's different in the way he does not express his masculinity in conventional ways. So he ends up being very isolated. And yet this cauldron, which is this giant cauldron that's sitting behind the school, it's a remnant from the time of colonial times, because this boarding school was once upon a time a resting place for British travelers to just go there and recover. And this cauldron was used to make food for them. And so he finds a ladder and goes in and climbs. And unlike in the boarding school, his isolation is sort of imposed on him, because he's surrounded by people and nobody really wants to talk to him. But once he's in the cauldron, he kind of claims his isolation because he's choosing to be there. And then he can be fully free. He's not under constant scrutiny over there. So he's just his own person. But there is a friend he makes, but the friend does not want to be openly seen as his friend, because it's high school. It's a boys' high school. And if you become friends with an outcast, you become an outcast yourself. So he says, I can talk to you, but only when you're in the cauldron, so you don't see me and don't recognize me. And that way I can still have my community, but I'm also interested in being friends with you, either because this character is working through his own queerness, or appreciates the fact that Shagun owns his identity without compromising it for the purpose of just being brought into the community of the boarding school. So I think it was a moment where he finds that connection, but the connection only happens with the separation of the iron wall of the cauldron, which then completely transforms when he goes to the street theater troupe. It's very different. It's very physical. It's very constantly surrounded by moving bodies. In some ways, I think it just reflected my own journey of finishing this book, because in an early draft that it submitted to one of my professors in the MFA program, the body was not acknowledged at all. And so my professor said, I don't know what Shagun looks like. I don't know what anyone in this world looks like. It's almost as if the body is completely eschewed. Why is there such a discomfort with anything physical? So in some ways, me being able to find comfort with my own sexuality and who I was in the world allowed me to give Shagun and grant him that experience with the street theater troupe.
Well, it's beautiful. I enjoyed that very much. Would you read for us?
Sure. I mean, I just thought I'll read a section from later on that's not too long, but gives you a sense of the street theater and the community that he finds. So this is set in a later moment where he's on the run. He has to escape because there is like a homophobic cop who's after his life. And if he doesn't escape, he could be in a very bad place. So his street theater troupe, the first two characters you meet are members of the street theater troupe, and then there is a character who is a very close friend of his. They're part of his found family, and that's like an important theme for me. I think that's the one thing that will stay consistent through my work, is the presence of found family. So, over the last few months, I'd acquired a Ken doll, a retro outfit in the Dravidian Book of Seas and Stargazing, Volume 2. I packed them with my clothes in the bag I'd arrived with. The bed was stripped, the room empty, ready for the next occupant. When Sue came over, we took my bag to the balcony and sat on it. She pressed my head to her shoulder and let me cry. When she sensed that the storm of my grief had subsided for now, she let me go. What do you want? She asked, like from life. I want a celebration, I said. I want to perform something beautiful and intimate with Rue and with Saya, and I want you to come see Marc and me running off into our bridal night. And oh, I want my mother to be there too. I mean, why not if wishes were horses and all that? Run off into a bridal night, Sue mocked. You're such a drama queen. We laughed. You want a celebration? You'll get one. Sue walked with me up one floor. My students, all 6 of them, were in Nandi's room. So were the other members of my troupe. We commenced preparations to stage my escape from Chamba, from the cop. We traded our clothes for costumes. The room, like our green room, was lamplit. And in the light of those flames, the bowls of makeup resembled precious stones, green like emerald, red like ruby, blue like lapis lazuli. The only movement was the hand of our makeup man, whose brush traced the contours of our faces, leaving in its wake trails of color, bright and viscous. Nandi started to sing a song, and Rue joined him, and then Saya joined him, and then I did. The makeup man's mouth twitched into a smile, even as his gaze was fixed on the faces our faces were becoming. Sue and my students listened to us, and every time we repeated the chorus, they hummed along. It was a song from the Hindu Romantic era, the Bhakti period, when art blurred the border between devotion and love, when a lover's home became your sacred address, and he, your lover, and all his fragile mortality, was no less a miracle than a god. Even after we stopped singing, we continued to hum, falling quiet one after the other, so that the silence that followed felt like a continuation of, rather than a punctuation to the song. We waited, sitting upright on the bed, on the floor, and then we heard our cue, a trumpet, a drum, a ululation, a human throat producing a sound that was in the register of birdsong. We filed down the stairs and exploded out the gate, the slow rhythm of a movement escalating into something rowdier, explosive almost. I at the epicenter, dressed in regular clothing, my face painted white, on my head a wig made of jute strings, surrounded by a wall of dancing bodies. Sue had my bag. From the corner of my eye, I saw the cop, a quick, blurred glimpse. 7 musicians surrounded us and drowned us in their music. In tandem, they blew their trumpets and struck the goatskin heads of their drums. We started to move like one body with many heads and limbs. We left the alleyway behind and entered the school's main street. Then out we went, leaving the campus behind, onto Market Street. Along the way, people joined us. College students, shoppers with bags of produce, couples out on evening walks. The janta surrounded the musicians who surrounded us as we moved along. Rue and Saya threw fistfuls of holy color into the air, drawing the powder from pouches worn around their waist. 3 winding streets later, we saw a parked minivan at one corner, which was my escape van. The goodbyes began as we continued to move, as the musicians sustained their music at its crescendo, as strangers danced all around us, as I left the town where I met and lost the man I loved. I twirled in a circle from Nandi to Rue to Saya to Sue. I gave them each a hug, pressed their bodies to mine, pressed my head to their necks, their shoulders. 3 rounds, 3 hugs for each of those humans whom I loved and who by some crazy miracle chose to love me in return. The shoulder of my costume was smudged with their makeup. We slowed but didn't stop as our bodies surrounded the minivan, pushed against it, causing it to jolt back and forth. The driver stood open the back door, leaned his upper body out, and waved his fist at us. Sue slid the bag into the van. I crouched amid a press of bodies and entered the van through the same open door. Nandi and Rue towered over the rest as they pretended to argue with the driver. Lying flat, with my stomach pressed to my bag, I watched the face of Sue, painted blue, of Saya, painted green. The red of their eyes made redder against the surrounding palettes of color. Nandi struck the minivan with his fist, and the driver slipped his body in and slit the door shut. Rue and Nandi pressed their hands to the van's windows, and our eyes met. They were surrounded now by the people of Chamba. They were falling behind. They thumped the car once more with their palms, and then they were gone. I closed my eyes and listened to the music and their cries, relishing this oral contact until I heard a rap on the window, wood on glass. The driver lowered his window. "This is no place to park," a stern voice said, and I knew it was the cop. "Sorry, sir," the driver said. "I stepped out for a cigarette and was about to go, and the crowd almost wiped me out." My eyes were closed. I didn't breathe. The driver started the engine, and after a beat, just like that, we drove away. The procession was headed for the railway station where my troupe members would board the train and the others would depart. When the cop would check them, as I knew he wouldn't find me. The driver pulled to the side of the road. With 2 bottles of water, I washed my makeup off. The driver took me to the railway station, and as I stood on the platform with my bag and watched my train pull in, I stuffed a hand into my pocket and found a piece of paper. Written on it in Hindi, "This isn't goodbye," signed Nandi Ru Saya. Marc had said those words to me in a different language. The resonance felt comforting. His promise, traveling through time, finding its place in Nandi's ink. I cried for all the tentative departures from my life, for the love that tentativeness contained. Stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So Shagun, this is an important moment for Shagun, and so early. This is from the later part of the book, and early in his journey, I think he doesn't feel that he matters. He doesn't have meaning. He's searching for that. He's searching for this community, this family. And I heard you say at one point, "If you don't matter, none of your troubles matter." I don't know if it was when we were talking or an interview, but I remember it, some version of that. And I'd love to hear more about this observation and how it relates to your story.
So that happened when I was having a really tough time with my family because I was refusing an arranged marriage. And I would just escape into the hills, into the Himalayas. I would just go on very long hikes. And there was something very powerful about being surrounded by these mountains that were, of course, so huge, but also so ancient. They had seen the kind of time which no human being experiences. And I somehow felt small in the best possible way, because when you feel small, surrounded by such majesty, it's not a kind of smallness that makes you feel bad. And giving myself the freedom to feel small made my problems feel small. So I told myself, in the longer arc of life, with the capital L, I don't really matter. I'm just a blip, and therefore my problems don't matter. It was a way of me to not deal with that problem because I hadn't come out. That would happen 3 or 4 years later. So it was a narrative that allowed me to just survive in that moment and go from day to day without just life overwhelming me. And I think with Shagun's story, he does that to a large extent with the street performances, because he's on the run. He just likes the fact that the theater troupe moves from one place to the other. He's on the roads. If he's on the road, the possibility that he would be caught by the cop or the Hindu conversion therapy folk is almost minimal. And so that becomes an escape route. And he also keeps taking on all these roles. And so he wears this mask, and he has a role and a character and a mask to hide behind. And he feels this incredible sense of freedom of becoming somebody else, because then he doesn't exist anymore. The first performance he has, there is this moment where he says, when his makeup is being put on and he's just about to be called onto the stage, there's a moment where he says, "Now I know what it's like to be the sky and watch the night take over your body and fill it with darkness." And he feels that sense of the night sort of coming in and filling him up in a way that he doesn't have to be himself. But of course, that changes as he starts forming human connections. He realizes he does not have to sacrifice himself. He can be both. He can be a performer, become somebody else, and acknowledge his own personhood. So I think that was a moment of transformation, which again coincided with my own experience of acknowledging and claiming my personhood and saying, anybody who does not agree with this is welcome to exit my life. And that's when my own found family sort of in some ways bullied me into like not giving up who I was.
You have a concept of vertical and horizontal family. I'd love to hear more about that. I think you're touching on it here, but can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, that's actually from, I found Andrew Solomon's book, Far from the Tree, where he talks about it's a collection of essays, and every essay is about a child who's fallen far from the tree, whether it's a protege who's just so skilled that their parents don't know how to relate to them, or in the case of Andrew himself, who's a queer kid, and so his parents just don't know how to connect with him. And he makes this very interesting case, like the act of creating a child is often, the word used for it is reproduction, as if the child is expected to be a replica of who the parents are, which oftentimes they're not. Khalil Gibran talks about how a child is like the arrow that's released from the bow, and you have no control over where the arrow goes a lot of the times. And the arrow has its own destiny that's independent of the bow, that remains still. And so I wanted to, so he talks about this idea of a horizontal identity is what you inherit from your parents, whether it's a profession. If your parents are farmers, you end up becoming a farmer, or it's you end up living in the same house, you end up getting married in similar circumstances. But when you're the apple that falls from the tree, in some ways you are pushed out of this horizontal identity and embrace a vertical identity, which is you form your own little community of outcasts. For whatever reason, they've been outcast, and you gravitate together. And I truly think there's a power. Those of us who live on the fringes, we no longer need the endorsement of the majority, because we formed a community powerful and contained enough that it's not isolating anymore. And that's where the vertical identity forms, where it also dismantles the pyramid structure that often exists, where your partner is at the top of the pyramid, maybe your parents and siblings come next, the biological family comes next, then your friends, and then your colleagues. Instead, these vertical communities exist in circles where everyone is important. Your friends are as important as your partner, as important as your non-human life, as your friends from the non-human life forms, whether it's your pets or creatures you feed on the streets. So I think that form of like a circular identity is a lot more holistic. It's a lot more sustainable, where the self doesn't have to ironically sacrifice itself at all, and can fully thrive in that kind of circular environment.
I love the concept of that. It does seem like we would take care of each other more, care for each other more. And speaking of sort of the apple falling from the tree, it's really a separation. And you made a very big change in your life, not family-wise, but career-wise. You have an MFA in creative writing and a PhD in comparative literature, but you also had a career in the corporate world. And I'm wondering how your corporate experience and your stint as the street theater performer shaped the way that you write.
Yeah, I used to work for Google in another lifetime, worked out of their India office, and then their offices in Dublin and San Francisco. I think the biggest thing that job gave me was the discipline to write, because the job takes up so much of your time, especially once you get into people leadership roles. If you don't have a very devoted time to write, it's very easy to stop writing, because everything else is just taking up your psychic and cognitive energy. So that kind of discipline allowed me to sit down and write every single day, especially when I was in the Bay Area. Sometimes there was one summer, which is when I decided to eventually leave, where I came out one day. It was, and I said, there's something off about today. I don't know. I can't put my finger to it. And then I realized I'd seen daylight in the evening after 3 months, because I was working every day till 10:30, 10:45. So by the time I would leave office, it was dark. But that day I'd left at 8 o'clock. So I was seeing daylight. And that's when something snapped in me, that if I continue this life, then I would end up never having to write, never writing a book. So that was when the rupture happened. So I think it gave me that sense of discipline. I would say that's the most important thing it gave me. And I think being that overwhelmed, if that had not happened, I would have never made the decision to quit the job and join the MFA program.
Wow, that's amazing that one moment changed your life. So speaking of, again, changing one's life, I've heard you in some interviews, I think, talk about the art of subtext. And I love what you said. Will you talk about the subtext, specifically how the subtext of the festering need, like you had a festering need to change your life and to write a book, but what about Shagun's festering need, which turned this story into a love story?
Yeah, I mean, in an early draft of this book, along with not having any kind of a physical embodied presence in the page, Shagun was asexual because I thought I was asexual at that point. And after I came out, I realized I came out because, again, the same professor in that workshop saw these pages and said, "This is also dying to be a gay love story. Why aren't you letting it be one?" And I remember being a little upset with her. I went to her office hours and I said, well, what makes you say that he's asexual? And she pointed to moments in the page which were just simple moments of the gaze, the way the gaze is directed, the way Shagun looks at Marc, who's now on the page, his boyfriend, but in that draft was his friend. It was very clear that he desired Marc, and even though it was that desire was absent from the sentence, but it was still present in the way the sentence was being read, and so she called it the subtext. I often think when you start writing, there's a part of your subconscious mind that surfaces and delivers a message to you as the conscious writer. And it won't let you ignore that message as long as you choose to engage and be in dialogue with the story on the page. So that subconscious message that shows up as a subtext uh, forces you to acknowledge a part of yourself that you've probably not been acknowledging so far. And she gave me this book called The Art of Subtext by Charles Baxter. And Charles Baxter in that book talks about, he defines subtext as the emotional energy that's festering in the margins of the story. And at some point it reaches, the tension builds and builds and reaches a point of explosion where from not being visible on the page, it explodes to the surface of the page and becomes visible. And it's sometimes violent for the character and for the way that sort of appearance of the subconscious comes up on the page. So I think it's that what happens cognitively is this, when you're writing the story, the subconscious says, you've ignored me for so long. I'm going to deliver this message. It will show up on your page even if you don't realize it. Readers will realize it. And if you choose to engage with it, you can weave that into the story to the point where there is that sort of bubbling background tension which readers notice, and at some point you bring it to the surface. So with Shagun on the page, it happens when it's early on, so it's not really a spoiler, but he does not acknowledge for a long time that he's attracted to men, and so there's until his father says, "I want you to," and this is true. This happens where boys and girls are pledged off to each other when they're still in their teens. And when the guy finishes his education, has a job, he fulfills that promise by getting married to a girl. So when the father brings that up and says, "You will get married to a girl and this girl will be coming up here soon," that's when he realizes he has to do something about it. Otherwise, he'll be locked into a life that is not of his choosing. So the subtext until that point in the story bubbles, but then at that point, it sort of explodes and he has to acknowledge who he is. And similarly, further on with his gender identity, he's very particular about just being seen as a conventional man. And part of it is because of his own high school trauma. He's not, when he's so mercilessly bullied, he wants to hold on to that normativity. And then it reaches a point when he performs the trans character, that becomes an explosion. But it's not a violent explosion. It's an explosion which he wants to embrace. So he's doing something he likes. It's a performer, but through that act of performing, he has to acknowledge something about himself as to why he likes performing that role so much.
So when I read the book, I didn't know you very well, or maybe I didn't know. I don't think I'd met you actually when I read the book. I thought that this was a fictionalized memoir, but I don't think it is. But I do have a question. So Marc, is he based on anyone in particular?
I wish, but more based on my ideal, I guess, in some ways, who I see as a potential life partner. Yeah, he's like, I think I poured because I just started rewriting him as soon as it came out, I poured all of my desire into him. So he sort of became this vessel where everything that I would want in a significant other, I poured into him. So I didn't realize that consciously at the time, but then later on when I read him, I'm like, oh, that's like my dream guy, basically. So yeah.
How much of the story in the when he is in the street theater troupe, how much of that matches your own life?
I mean, I did. So when I was working with Google, I took a leave and loss of pay to work with the street theater troupe. I didn't act with them. That was my... I saw them perform, and that's when I realized I want Shagun to be a street performer, and I traveled with them for about 2 months, 2.5 months. So a lot of those street performers are based on the street theater troupe that I'd met and engaged with. The three main people who became my friends and sort of my guide into that world, they're based on real characters, and they traveled by the Ganges River. So they would usually start their journey close to where the river merges with the ocean and travel all the way to the point of origin. So there's like a base camp. You have to really trek up to the glacier. So the base camp is the last place where you would get an audience, and that would be their last performance. And so that whole season, I tracked their performances and wrote for them, in some cases, relocating myth to contemporary times. And I think that without that experience, I think all of those street theater scenes would have not felt lived for me at all. So that kind of active field research for me, documenting their experiences, photographing them through their whole the makeup process for them, they really see it as a sort of a death and a rebirth where you as the person dies and you're reborn as a character. And then when you come and wash your makeup off, the character has a death, and then you are born again. Which is why when you perform a myth, it's always supposed to be told in present tense, because you've become that person, you've become that character, and you're living their narrative reality, which in some ways has become your embodied reality. All of those details are like minor textual details and also philosophical details. So it was drawn very much from that. I told them, I mean, I do have pretty terrible stage fright, so even though it doesn't show right now, I guess, but I would tell them that I'm not going to perform, and so every now and then they would just to pull my leg, say, "Oh, we don't have an actor. You have to fill in." So yeah, I didn't put that into the book. I just made him a performer. I guess because I wish I didn't have stage fright and I could be a performer. So again, that desire got poured into him.
Well, that was good training, because you don't appear to be afraid tonight. So very glad you did that. So we talked about your short story appearing in the Best American Short Story Collection. Will you tell us, you're published in so many places, you've written a lot of stories. Will you tell us a little bit about the Magic Bangle?
It was actually, that experience happened what happened was I was in Hyderabad one summer, and I was dating a guy at the time, and I was on a bus to go meet my friends, and my phone's wallpaper was a picture of me and him. And I got a text on my phone, so the screen lit up, and it was a crowded bus, and this guy sitting next to me saw that, and he was so mad at me. And he said, people like you are ruining the culture of this country. You're bringing all these Western ideologies of. And I tried to lie that, well, he's my friend, and he just wouldn't buy it. He's like, you clearly are together. And he was yelling at me, like we were sitting at much, like half the distance we were sitting at, and he was screaming at me. And he drew the attention of a lot of guys. And they basically stopped the bus and asked me to get off the bus, saying they didn't want to share the bus space with me. So it was in this, so between where my mom lives and where my friend is, it's this military area where the phone signal is very weak. So my phone basically would not even pick up on Uber or any app. And then I didn't know how to get out of that place. So then I saw this girl driving her scooter. So I waved her down, and I didn't want her to freak out. And so I told her what happened immediately. And I said, could you get an Uber, and I'll find a way to, PayPal you. So she called me an Uber, and she just waited there for me. And then when she saw my Uber arrive, because if she leaves, her location changes. So she had to wait there for me. And so when the Uber arrived, and I said, give me your PayPal, I'll pay you. And she said, no, just pay it forward. And there was some beautiful moment of humanity despite the awfulness of the situation. Hyderabad is, even though I wasn't like born there, I didn't spend my childhood there, does feel like my hometown. And that interaction with this girl reinforced some sense of, oh, this town still has its humanity. So I wanted to reimagine Hyderabad as a place of queer utopia, like take one little space in this big city and make it a queer utopia where these two men meet and there is nothing hindering them. So the old part of the city, which is just very historic and beautiful, and I would go there a lot of times with my friends, I just imagine the main character going there, seeing somebody in a bangle shop, and that's why the Magic Bangle, and they are clearly drawn to each other. And they go to there's a place, like, for those of you who know, India, biryani is like a huge thing in Hyderabad. And there's this one restaurant where you can order a communal plate where like multiple men can eat at the same time, and they don't realize how very queer that experience is. So these two men get one plate of biryani and they're eating out of it, and nobody's even batting an eyelid because it's so common. So I think and there's a magic bangle that this guy says, we can ask the bangle, but whatever the bangle predicts, we have to follow through. So that's the question. So if they ask the bangle, will we be together? If the bangle says no, then they can't be together. So they were like, should we ask the question or not? But I think the whole goal was to create a queer utopia where these guys can just be whoever they want to be.
I love that. I can't wait to read it. I think it's now time for you all to be able to ask some questions if you like. I have to, unfortunately, go. I have to catch a plane to Atlanta. I'm going to be talking with Rita Mae Brown tomorrow morning at the Decatur Book Festival, and I have a flight that's leaving pretty soon. So if you'll come to the microphone if you have a question, that way the question will be recorded and they can hear it. So thank you for letting me be here with you, Shastri.
Thank you for doing this with me.
Congratulations on a beautiful story and your paperback release.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Diane. As a writer, I'm curious if you could talk more about your experience of kind of like meeting your subconscious on the page and what that was like to like work through. Like, did you have to take a break? Were you very surprised? And like, what led you to like lean in and really commit to incorporating that into your novel?
I think the subconscious, because we are so used to suppressing the message it gives us, oftentimes the only way for it to show up is if you, for me, it showed up at least when I was writing every single day without taking a break, even if it was like half an hour, I would do it. And then as you sort of fall into the rhythm of the story, that sort of structure which you require for a novel or a short story, that sort of falls to the back, to the wayside, and you really start living the experiences of these characters. Often you'll find these characters are doing things that you didn't really think that they would do, and you're like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be doing that, but then this character just does what it wants to. He wants to anyway. So that's when that's when the subconscious has stepped in. And I think just not trying to control the narrative too much. For the second novel, I did plot the book a little bit, but if the story goes in a direction that I didn't fully plan, I let it go, because that's when I realized my subconscious is sort of giving me that message that has to show up then in the subtext of the story. So I think just writing every day and not censoring yourself on the page, because you can always edit content out later on. But I think in that first draft, it's so important that you don't censor yourself out. Do you write fiction? I mean, it's a very, very intimate group. We can all just mingle and chat as well. It doesn't have to be this formal. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I don't write fiction. I write philosophy, and I have a sense of like when I'm done, like I've established my conclusion. So how is a fiction writer? How do you know when the subconscious is taking over? How do you know when to stop and this is the end of the story?
With the first book, I didn't actually, because I ended up writing, this is about 350 pages. And the first draft was completely uncontainable. It was 850 pages long because my subconscious didn't want to stop. It had a lot to say. And then I think then I could step back and figure out saying, what is the shape of the story? What is the emotional heartbeat I want readers to feel in each moment, and how can they in some way still be connected to the main character's arc and growth? And there were moments which did not fit with the arc of his experience within the story, and he's, in my subconscious mind, a person beyond the story you see. And I think that's true of people we meet, right? We meet somebody as a colleague, we meet somebody as a friend, we know only a small portion of them, and they have a full life beyond our engagement with them. And that's true of characters as well. We know who they are on the page, but not beyond. And then everything else just became a part of their life beyond who they're on the page. I'm trying to be a little more disciplined with the second book, so I don't have to cut 60% of it. But it still happens, and I think some of it also comes from practice, having written a full. I think in the middle of editing The Sea Elephants, that's when I understood how to write a whole novel, which is its own beast. And so then finding ways to not really control, but channel what the subconscious has to say within the emotional beats that are relevant to the extent to which you meet the character on the page. I don't know if that made sense. Oh. Yeah. Thanks. Well, that's my nephew. So he's already asked me all the questions that he. Okay, thank you. Like I said, I'm around here at least for the next 15, 20 minutes. You're welcome to come up to me and talk. Thank you.